Good morning and welcome to this webinar. We're just going to wait for a few minutes for people to come into the webinar. It just takes a couple of seconds for everyone to filter in. So we'll just wait a few moments and then we'll make a start. Well, I think we've certainly got a few people who have arrived now, so I think we'll make a start. So a very warm welcome to this webinar on how schools use their STEER data and their actions, both in the inspection process itself, but also in the writing of their SEF to very positive effect. Sometimes it can be very difficult to provide inspectors with the proof they need, particularly in relation to pupil development. So I'm delighted to introduce two people today who've been through this process numerous times, not only as a head or a deputy head, but also as an inspector. Firstly, we have Simon Antwis. Simon is a former headmaster of 3 schools and a former inspector who now works full-time for STEER. And secondly, Jonathan Harris. Jonathan is the deputy head at Dean Close Prep School, responsible for, amongst other things, getting the process of all their schools in the foundation ready for an inspection, including their SEF, and is also an ISI boarding compliance and team inspector as well. And in fact, he just completed his last inspection last week, so he's very up to date with current practice. So thank you very much, both of you, for your time today and for giving up what I know is very precious time. Just before Simon and Jonathan get into their interview, just a couple of quick questions from me to both of them. Firstly, Simon, to you as the inspector, just say a couple of brief questions, just to get us get the picture set up, as it were. First of all, what is it, Simon, that pleases you when you go into a school for the first time as an inspector?
I think what I'm hoping for as I arrive at the school gates is that the school has very clear evidence, very clearly organised for me. So there's nothing better than having a folder which is divided up into the areas A1 to 8 and P1 to 8, where I can easily access evidence. Obviously, there's a website that's pre-populated before the inspection starts, but it's really encouraging that a school has organised evidence that addresses their own judgments in their own SEF. And it's equally as frustrating to have to continually ask for evidence to back up what they're saying in their SEF. And also that evidence is of really good quality, really quantitative if possible, but really good qualitative evidence. But that's what I'm looking for.
Thank you. And Jonathan, as the deputy head, how do you come up with the judgments that you make on the school?
I think we're always, as everyone's probably aware, is looking at the outcomes for the pupils. It's looking for what those outcomes are, rather than reminding ourselves that outcomes are what they're achieving. It's not the fact that we've got an amazing well-being or something that's a contributory factor. We're looking at making sure we get the outcomes and know what the outcomes of the pupils are from our pupil interviews, lesson observations, interviews with staff, and observations as we walk around the school.
And how easy do you find it to get these?
I think, as Simon said, it's really important that schools have got evidence before, the SEF is a very key piece of evidence that you've got to provide schools, to provide inspectors with evidence before they are looking, so that they can also look for trails and what they're going to be looking for in terms of what areas are there that they want to actually find more evidence, So I think, it's making sure that you've got yourself sorted.
Just before I hand over to Simon, just to say that we are hoping to have a question and answer session at the end. So if you do have some questions, please do feel free to add those. And I think there's a little button at the bottom of the screen, Q&A. So if you do have some questions down there for either Simon or Jonathan, please do put them down. So Simon, over to you, and good luck, Jonathan.
I'll be gentle. So Jonathan, could you give me an overview of how pastoral care is analysed, measured and evaluated at Dean Close?
Yeah, we analyse our pastoral care by continual communication and reflection by all staff on it. We use steer tracking, particularly looking at the executive summary report. We notice, and I'm sure all other schools have, priority pupils have increased due to the pandemic. Yes, they have. We can then look to analyse that data of priority pupils. So looking how our action plans are affecting it. So 22% action plans, assessment 2 down to 15%. That's really positive to see that we've got evidence of our action plans having an effect. We can also use the executive summary to target year groups, triangulate the data with staff and the summary. So year 5 are a group with the highest percentage of biases. We may need a cohort plan. We can use the data at the next assessment to then see if our cohort plan has actually had a positive effect. It helps us also to focus on houses, because we have a house system at our school, what houses maybe need particular support, and maybe gender. It really helps us to see which gender has the most polar biases. And as a senior leader, it really helps us to quickly analyse the situation in our school, which we can then share with staff. What's our focus going to be?
Thank you very much. So based on that analysis and that evaluation, what are the school pastoral care priorities particular to Dean Close that you could share with me?
I think this sort of links with ISI in terms of, and I think the whole inspection process with everything that's come out from Everyone's Invited and Black Lives Matter, all these things which have really become focuses for Ofsted and nationally, is the pupil voice. The pupil voice is absolutely key for us at Dean Close. What do our pupils feel and say? It really is important. You may find in inspections that actually a lot more of your pupils are actually being interviewed, because it's really important that we're looking for the small minority. I think we talk about them sometimes as the missing middle. What are they saying? And the good thing about steer tracking, as I'm sure all the colleagues that are here have noticed, is the fact that we are asking everybody. We're not just asking a certain group of people. We've got evidence in terms of our school of what every child is saying. It's their voice. However small that voice might be in the big scheme of things, they have an opportunity through steer tracking for us to hear what their voice is. We want our pupils to know that we're listening to them. This is their opportunity to tell us using, our assessment, and we can then actually see, are we listening to them? So our action plans are then evidence of us listening to those pupils who have told us how they're feeling, so that we can then use that moving forward.
So this steer tracking data you're talking about, what has it highlighted for you? What have you focused in on?
Well, I think in terms of it's really good in terms of us being able to see what year groups particularly maybe that we need to focus on, and also if we need to refocus something. So when we put something in place, what has that had an effect? I mean, we've noticed, and I don't know, it might be something in the discussion, that over-regulation has really been on the rise in our school. 47, let's say, priority pupils, maybe nearly 50% are at risk of over-regulation. And that also is 7% of our overall school population. So COVID's left children feeling out of control. And so therefore they're trying to come up with more ways of controlling things. I'm sure schools have all noticed, and I was reading about the British Medical Journal talking about an 81% increase in referrals for children and young people to mental health services. The number of children and young people waiting to start treatment for suspected eating disorders has quadrupled. So the executive summary gives us a clear view of where we need to focus and to what degree. Use the cohort data, look at that year group. What do we need to focus on? Maybe year 7 particularly is for us a focus. And we can then use those plans to feed it into our wider pastoral input, through into our PHCE, which I'm sure everyone's aware, and RSC is a real focus for ISI at the moment. Our form and our tutor assemblies. It's sort of joining the dots together. We can use our knowledge. It's always triangulating all that data. But, what about our interventions in year 7? We focus on that as a year group. we made a change. So we've gone from single sex tutor groups to mixed gender. You know, the early data that we're seeing, we're doing assessment 2 at the moment, is, and also from our reflections, because of course it's not just the data, it's what do we as professionals feel, is that the changes to a mixed boy-girl tutor group in year 7 has had some really positive effect, and the data that we're going to get from our assessment 2 will really help us to see, has our intervention been targeted and has it worked, and if not, well, we need to change and look again.
So you mentioned year 7 a couple of times there. To what extent have you improved on this perceived weak area of your pastoral provision? What evidence have you got that it's got better?
Well, I think, you know, once again, looking at the number of action plans that we've had to write, looking at staff and parental comments, using all of that and the data we've got, we focused and realised, and for our school, because we're a prep school, year 7 is a particular a year group where we have quite a lot of entry. Our year group can go from 50 to 70, so we've got, you know, a third increase. And with our current year 8, we realised that there'd be particular focus in terms of a difficulty in that year group. So this year, for our year 7s, we've, you know, really focused on, once again, I said we've changed our mixed tutor groups. We've also moved our bonding trip from the start of the year to the end of the year to actually give them a chance to get to know each other properly, using every Friday of term as a whole year group event rather than individual tutor groups, bringing the year group as a whole together. You know, using parental support through the family signposts, giving parents advice. And I think, you know, we're really going to know whether that's really had an effect on assessment 2 when, you know, we've got our final data. But as I said already, you know, it focused us on a year group we really need to work that transition. And I think, you know, senior schools looking at that transition from 8 to 9, if they're coming from a prep school, you know, those are key transition points when things change, and we need to be able to look at quantitative data which tells us what are the problems. We've got a problem, what is the problem, how are we going to fix it?
Could you tell me what sort of training your pastoral staff have had to help you deal with the priorities you've been telling me about?
Yeah, I mean, we use the steer tracking training modules that are there, and I think that they're really useful, particularly even myself. I'm a senior practitioner. I went on the 2-day course when it was first launched, and even for myself, looking now when I'm starting to analyze that data, going and having a 5-minute recap on self-disclosure, on overregulation, on some of those, and I think that's been really helpful in terms of helping our staff in terms of going to look at that. And we run that as well in terms of our inset every year, every term. We focus on our steer tracking. We remind our staff in terms of the importance of it. And I think, you know, senior leaders, you know, I don't know if there's any here, maybe, you know, sometimes we don't realize how much time it takes. So we've really made an effort to provide time for staff who are writing these action plans to reflect and look at that data, and rather than it sort of be in their cover-free period, we will provide cover to enable them to sit down and also to do it with somebody. I think, you know, when you're looking at data and you're looking at a child, one person's view of a child could be very different to another. So by having 2 people there, so we insist all our action plans are done by 2 people. So we're trying to make sure we've got our training for staff on writing action plans, so our more experienced staff who've maybe written more are helping staff to do that.
That's fantastic, thank you. Can you give me an example of a case study to illustrate the impact of the pastoral care systems you've been describing to me?
Yeah, I think I sort of have in terms of the year 7 group, in terms of particular, that's the sort of case study that I'd focus on. We have also, in terms of our year 5s, you know, particularly noticed girls in terms of low self-disclosure. I know that is a trend nationally, and I think in terms of as a year group there, that is a group where we have really focused on our staff training and the action plans that we've written to make sure that they have got action plans as a cohort. So we've done the cohort action plan for that year group to support them in terms of making sure that we can see, and as I said, assessment 2 is coming out. So, you know, those are the sort of, that's a case study the year 7 one I've sort of already said, and the year 5 girls as well.
Are there any individual students that have come up as priority pupils that have surprised your staff?
Yeah, I think we spoke about this. I speak from personal experience as a parent. My son has been through AS steer tracking all the way through since we launched it, really, and he's now in the senior school in lower 6. And I know particularly when he moved to the senior school, if you looked at his steer tracking data, it would be very clear that it was all very no problem, no polar biases. Come to senior school, transition. We as his parents, I mean, I'm sure that as parents we understand, the child the school saw was not the child we saw at home. And in a way we quite like it. Our children are very well behaved at school, but we knew that underneath that well behaved outward exterior, there was someone whose legs, they're big legs now, because he's 6'3", are paddling very furiously underneath. And he was exhibiting in steer tracking, his data really showed what we as parents knew, that he was struggling, particularly with disclosure, trusting others. There's a whole new year group people, who does he trust? And I think, for his tutor and staff, that was a surprise, but it wasn't a surprise to us as parents. We in the generalized at home were seeing this definitely, and in contextualized into school, there definitely was a boy that needed help, and it backed up what we as parents thought. So it was really, on a personal level, great to see that. In a way, it sort of backed up what I thought about steer tracking. I saw it on a personal level.
Thank you for that. Do you at any point involve parents in your monitoring and actions?
I think that is one of our major ongoing focuses in terms of how it is. I think the pandemic has really focused parents. Most of them have had to be teachers as well as parents now, so they've seen their children in front of a screen involving themselves in lessons. So our parents are coming to us for advice. They see us as the expert in a way. And the family signposts, I don't know if any people in the webinar have looked at it. It really helps to give us advice for those parents. The parents want help. They're struggling. They know, and they see the data, mental health on the eyes, it's all there, the BBC News. And so actually the family signpost helps to use the language that that steer tracking uses. It becomes embedded in the parents and the pupils. So, recognizing the public front stage and the private backstage, using those, parents understanding that the child might present one thing, but actually be feeling another. All right, coming up with ways of sharing their thoughts, ideas and opinions. I think, one of the ideas on family signposts, I think, is this family WhatsApp group. It's great. It gets you to share ideas and fun things, that you're involved in. It gives you a chance, and you're providing opportunities to share, because that's what we want. So family signpost is a really positive addition, and I think I'd recommend others, any schools that, if you haven't had a look at it, do have a look. Being a parent isn't easy. We're all maybe parents here. Having a 17-year-old, it's not easy, but I think parents, not all parents, are more supportive and understanding of how hard the job of being a teacher is, because they certainly don't want to go back to being that teacher at home anymore. That's what they're looking for. So they need support with particularly the rise that there is in mental health problems.
Thanks very much. Could you tell me what impact you've had in the way you manage pastoral staff performance, or give them credit for what they're doing?
Well, I think some people feel more confident when they're talking pastorally. Some people might feel more confident dealing with an academic in terms of a classroom. And I think the thing that we've really focused on is actually reaffirming, using steer tracking to reaffirm staff in what they're doing is having a positive effect. The action plans that they've written, they take time, but actually by showing them the data, our action plans have had an effect, and staff are able to see that the time they put in and the effort they've done is actually had a positive effect on that child. And as educators, that's what we want. We want what we do to make a difference. The outcome for that child to be making progress, not just academically, but pastorally. So for staff, it's enabling us to set targets. So the action plans, helping them to see, to write them. it helps to lead them as well. The thing with the action plans is there's so much there which actually can help them with their teaching in terms of their, we can don't just use it with their pastoral, we can use it with their appraisal in terms of their teaching. What tips are there and what ways that we can use AS tracking, in terms of the signposts that we're putting in place, that can have a positive effect, not just only on that individual child, on the whole of the group that may be in the lesson that you've got. So, running sessions with them, reviewing with them. And I think assessment 2 is a really positive chance to reaffirm that actually all that work that was put into, and I think, staff really buy into seeing that what they've done has made a difference.
And all this focus on, pastoral care that you're talking about, what difference has it made to the delivery of pastoral care in the classroom and the corridors?
I think it's made it more focused. It's rather than us. I got a feeling I know there's something not quite right there. We have the pupil voice, and I think this is what Steer does. It gives us that child's voice and everybody's voice, and we're not just listening or seeing the characters that dominate the school in terms of might dominate the environment. It really helps to make a difference to individual children. We're focusing on an individual. That action plan might have a positive effect on others, but it really focuses on that one child, my son, let's say, who really is struggling with his trust of self. By putting an action plan in place, we're highlighting that child. This child matters. He's not just a group in year 7. Actually, there's an individual. So we can really target it, but we also can target the groups. I mean, girls, in terms of particularly self-disclosure, self-disclosure has been something we as a school have had unfortunately, Leslie would probably say to us, we've had it as a major thing, but I think this is nationally. So it's helping us to highlight the things that we need to work on.
Thank you for all those comprehensive answers. I appreciate that. Is there any question that you wish I'd asked you?
No, it's a shorter interview than an ISI interview, so I'm very grateful for that. You could ask me about, am I happy about Nottingham Forest beating Liverpool, playing Liverpool in the next round? And yeah, I am. No, I'm very happy with everything you've asked me.
Could I ask you a quick question, Jonathan, if I may?
You may.
If you have an inspector, thank you. If you have an inspector that sort of comes in that doesn't know very much about Steer and how it works, how would you explain Steer to an inspector that isn't that aware of what it does?
I think it's making sure they understand. Once again, as I said, pupil voice is a key thing. So explaining how it works in terms of how it is the pupil's voice. So you're telling me it's a pupil voice. Well, how is the pupil? So these children sit down. They are telling us how they are feeling. That data is then used to produce, the cohort plans or whatever. So it's explaining how is it the pupil's voice? Make sure they understand, how you are listening, and also what are the positive outcomes for those children? How are we improving that child's outcomes? We need to evidence what that is. So I think it's making sure they understand that it's every child's voice. You're not just listening. It's you are really targeting it as the individual, really.
So I mean, just really sort of summing up what you were saying, because I think this is key, isn't it? It's vital with any inspection. So you're hearing that pupil voice. You're then saying, okay, well, what's it telling us? You're then putting things in place either at an individual level for the pupil, or indeed at a group or cohort level. And are you showing these plans, whether it's group, individual, cohort, are you showing the plans to the inspectors themselves, or a case study of one?
You can use examples in terms of that, in terms of giving them an example of one. They won't quote names in a report. We know, that's just not there. They actually won't even quote year groups, and they won't quote Steer tracking. I'll just say that, you're not allowed to. They won't mention anything like, if you're using any type of computer program, Microsoft, they won't. That's not mentioned. But it's looking at ensuring that you've got evidence to back up what you are saying. So if Steer is having a positive effect on your children, how is steer having a positive effect on children? What is the positive effect it's doing? It's improving their self-esteem. It's improving their disclosure. What is it doing in terms of that?
And I like how you talked about sort of joining up the dots in terms of saying, well, what information is this getting back on a sort of macro level, and then feeding that into all the other areas of our pastoral input, such as assemblies or tutor sessions. And I particularly like that idea of how it influences your PHSE, because I think as an inspector, isn't it, that is, I think you alluded to it as well, Jonathan, that is really a key area that inspectors are looking at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's an area which is really important, you know, in terms of them making sure. I think, you know, as schools have been aware, you know, everyone's invited, and Black Lives Matter, those are particular focuses that have highlighted areas. And I think, you know, it's making sure that the percent, you know, we're listening to everybody. It's those children who maybe haven't told us in the past their concerns. We're wanting to highlight and make sure that everybody's being listened, everyone's listened to, everyone's invited, everybody's being listened to. We're listening to all those children who maybe haven't felt able to tell us in the past how they're feeling, and of incidents that have occurred. And I think, you know, any school that, once again, any school that says they haven't got bullying, that I'm afraid that the days of being able to say that are long gone. We all need to be able to admit that we've had that, and actually probably all need to admit that we have had incidents and issues with everyone's invited. It's not about trying to beat people with a stick. It's actually about saying we want places to be better. We want schools to be looking for their children, looking out for all those children who maybe don't say when they should have, when we want them to. So we've got to give them opportunities to share how they're feeling and what they're feeling.
And I suppose by the group and the cohort plans, you are demonstrating, aren't you, a way in which you're doing that?
Yeah.
And I also I like that idea as also of, you were talking about that staff peer mentoring. So you're sharing that good practice, aren't you, with staff, and perhaps pairing people up. How do you write your action plans as a staff? Do you write them individually? Do you provide them with staff time, or do you do it, I know as some schools do, as a collective?
It is a collective. It's always two people. It's the house parent, because we have a house system, the house parent with the teacher. So absolutely, it's not one-on-one. As I said, it's making sure you've got, because as we know, you know, there are certain children who we see in a different light. We want to get as wide a view. It's not just the pupil's voice. We want that, but we want to hear the professional voice. And two professionals might have a slightly different point of view. So it's actually, then by having two people, we can really focus and drill into how can we support that child, and also it's sharing that review period. So once we've put an action plan in place, reviewing it, making sure that there's a point to review. So has it had an effect? Has it made a positive impact? Had a positive impact? Because that's what we're looking for, impact, isn't it? We're making a difference.
Yeah, and that comes exactly right, as you said, isn't it? Coming back to that second assessment, and then saying, actually, what on an individual level or on a group level, how are we seeing the data that we saw before? How has it changed? Which pupils have got the green arrows? Which pupils have got the red arrows? What's been the impact on self-disclosure or trust of others or whatever? And I think that is, to be able to see impact is critical, isn't it? And presumably that is what an inspector wants to see, wants the outcomes, don't they?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, and just in terms of your role, Simon, in terms of either preparing a school for inspection or as an inspector, that idea that you're hearing every voice rather than just perhaps ones that have been picked up through staff observation, how important is that?
I think what I'm looking for in a school is that not only is there a policy which is backed up with a procedure, but there's a culture. So some of the questions I was asking Jonathan were to identify that there's a culture. So the question about, you know, how are you seeing a difference in the classroom and the corridors, was to see that what's been put in place, whether it's steer or whatever, you know, mechanism it is, they haven't just written a policy before we've turned up. And I've certainly had that inspection as well. It's been clear that policies have been spruced up and put in place before arrival. So then it's my job to check that policy is being followed. There is a procedure. And thirdly, to get the higher grades, we're looking for a culture. So I'd be trying to triangulate what Jonathan was saying by talking to the children, see if that experience is the same, talk to the staff, see if it matches up what he said. So evidence has got to triangulate. So wherever I get it from, it's got to match up with what Jonathan said. So that's the reason for those questions. So that's what I'm looking for.
And I suppose that feeds into what Jonathan was saying too, isn't it, about involving parents?
Correct. So obviously parents get a survey and interviews, children would, the staff would, and I'll be asking similar questions to identify that there is a good culture in the school, or even indeed an outstanding culture. So not only is it important that you've got the evidence base when you arrive, it's really important that it's backed up in the interviews and the other evidence gathering you do during the inspection.
And in the schools where you were head and introduced STEER, did you find that the culture did change in those schools?
It did, yep. Obviously, it's not going to happen overnight. It takes a lot of work. STEER are really good, obviously, at a 3-year sort of launch and embedding program. I think what is encouraging to me is when you hear tutors use the language that Jonathan's using when they're describing their children. So they're talking about low self-disclosure or high trust of self, or dysregulating children. That, to me, as an inspector, tells me that there's a culture embedded in that school, and that the children are being identified. We are seeing that hidden middle, and that the claims that the pupil voice hears every child's voice are genuine.
And do please, we've got about 4 minutes left, so please do ask any questions to Simon or Jonathan if you would like to. And actually, that's something. While if there are any questions, that language and understanding, I think, is key, isn't it, for staff? What we are trying to help them in that staff CPD is to have an understanding of some of the causation and some of the issues that pupils are facing, and a language for them to be able to explain that both to each other, to parents, and to themselves, I suppose. And I think that goes alongside, doesn't it, with that culture that you talked about.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how far that extends. So, I know in my schools, we shared the data and the language from STEER with counsellors, for example, so they can hit the ground running with their children. Yes, they've got to build rapport and get the child to open up during their counselling sessions, but that takes up a lot of time, and obviously the time the child might have with the counsellor is limited. If you can say to a counsellor, look, these are the issues that we've had in the action plan, here's the action plan for your benefit, it means that you can start pre-armed and you can hit the ground running and find solutions quicker. So it's that, how deep does that culture go is what you're looking for.
And I think, as you say, it takes time. And interesting, Jonathan, I mean, how long has Dean Close now been using STEER?
Oh, wow. Oh, I should know that. I think it's probably been about 6 years. I've been deputy head. Yeah, about 5 years. I mean, we took it in my first year as deputy head, and then we were accredited the year after. And I think, we've done it for 5 years, and I think we're seeing like our first year are now in lower SIP, so it's going to be really interesting for us to see. Me as a parent, not that I get to see the data at the senior school, but seeing that progression. We're seeing now children who started in year 3 coming to year 8. And it's really going to be, it's something we're very pleased with, and as the foundation, all our schools are involved in it now. It's something that all our schools are part of.
And do you sorry, Simon, go on.
I just go back up what John said. Seeing those threads of pastoral care evidenced over a longitudinal period is really powerful data, really powerful for an inspector to see that how that's changed over time and what's happened for that child. Because often inspectors look for academic progress and those threads, but to see it the pastoral side of the school as well is really impactful.
And going on from there, of course, you talked about those pupils who started it are now in the lower 6th. They will be able to see their data from this term, and imagine being able to see the data that you've accumulated over 5 years, and seeing that laid out in front of you. How powerful is that in terms of your own self-understanding? And
I think you're really right. In terms of that, the children seeing, and they'll be able to see their journey, as we always talk about the journey being steering down a road. Seeing those bumps, will they be able to identify that bump in the road that was maybe caused by a friendship issue or a particular trauma or something that happened in year 9, that transition period, or maybe the transition to lower 6 once again? you know, people reasserting their position in the pecking order, so to speak. I think, you know, for children, that's self-understanding coming from the data is really important, because they'll be able to remember those, you know, why was I doing that? You know, if they've got the language and the equipped to use it, they'll know what those events were in their life that caused a sudden maybe steer, holding onto the steering wheel tightly and over-regulating.
And then ESTYN will take it that one stage further in terms of enabling them with those soft skills that they will need when they go beyond school, which is a little bit of a bubble, to help them to sort of self-regulate even more effectively at university or wherever. So we are just about to run out of time. So first of all, can I just say thank you very much again to Simon and Jonathan. It's been really fascinating listening to you both as heads, deputy heads and inspectors. If you could give one piece of advice, each of you, and I'll ask Simon first, it gives you a bit of time, Jonathan, to think about it. If you could give one piece of advice in terms of using steer data, the culture in an inspection, what would it be?
I'm just going to have 3 words really: identification, action, impact. If you can have those 3: identification, action, and impact. If you can have those 3 elements in all your pieces of evidence, the inspector find it very hard to challenge your judgment.
Perfect. Thank you for those. Identification. Sorry, I've forgotten the second one already.
What you identified,
yeah,
what you actioned about it, and how you measured the impact.
And then impact, yeah. Jonathan.
Pupil voice. I think pupil voice, and that's in so many areas so important for us. What is the pupil's voice? Are we listening? How are we evidencing listening to every child, and every child matters?
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. And I hope, I know this was a webinar open to accredited schools, but it's one that obviously the schools are already quite experienced, but it's certainly something that's come up as something that would be really useful, I think, for schools to listen to. So I hope those who are tuning in, I hope they found it helpful. And thank you very much again to Simon and Jonathan, and thank you again all those who have been listening in. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.